All right, welcome everyone to SIG-Windows. It's February 21st, 2023. This is a CNCF meeting, and so we follow the CNCF Code of Conduct. If anybody has any questions or concerns, please reach out to us or any of the leads. And otherwise, welcome. Hope everybody had a good weekend, and I think we'll get started here. So for announcements, Code Freeze is March 14th, so coming up a couple weeks now. And so if you have any PRs, get them out there, get them reviewed, ping us on any of them, and let us know if you need help with anything. Does anybody have anything out there that needs review from anybody from SIG-Windows or anything?
My node log viewer, of course, at some point will need another review.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. That still needs some work though after the last SIG-Arch meeting, right?
Yeah. I in fact got it working without using API server, but I now need to like get rid of all the API changes and all that stuff, right? So I have the basic pieces working again. I just now need to remove a lot of code that's there now.
Okay, cool. Great. And then we'll welcome any new contributors if anybody's out there that wants to say hi and let us know what you're up to and why you're interested in SIG-Windows. Okay. Doesn't look like anybody wants to say hi, so we'll move on the agenda. And so Mark, I think you have the first one here, periodic tests.
Yeah, so people who are here, we're working on KPNG for Windows, and ported we've moved a lot of the code from the Windows server or the Windows WinKernel proxy or from the KPNG repo to the Windows service proxy repository, and we finally got a periodic test pass stood up that's running KPNG. This test is using a cluster API provider for Azure running this, but it is running the latest image out of that repository. So now we can start to iterate and do some more work on this, because as you can see, the basic functionality is still not working. But now we can measure.
Like we're missing, yeah, it looks like I'm surprised those are all service tests, so we've got some actual real bugs we got to work through.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to take a look through any of the failures since this got set up, but
yeah.
Progress.
As I recall, there's 6 or 7 total tests in Linux. I'm sorry, I think there's 6 or I never counted for the SIG-Windows tests, but for the Linux tests, if you disable kubeproxy, there's 6 conformance tests that fail. And I don't know if that number is different for Windows, but like in the worst case scenario, I wouldn't expect more than like 10 or 15 tests to fail.
Yeah, I think that I wonder if it's those on the run that's in the middle. I wonder if it's those. That one where the most recent one looks like something else is failing.
Yeah.
Too, but there's 6 or 7 on the one from the 218.
Yeah, or maybe there's new ones. Maybe API machinery added a bunch of new ones.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So
thanks, Mark. You've just been like all over this, man. Like this is great. You and Ameem have done so much stuff.
I think it's going to benefit Windows a lot too. So
yeah,
I know you've worked a lot just with KPNG in general, so it's good to see some more progress being made here.
Thanks so much. Okay, cool. Great.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's all I wanted to say about that. I think we'll just continue filing issues and everything in the repository.
Yeah.
If anybody's looking to be involved, it's a great place to get involved. So.
Yep. Yeah. Especially if you're interested in networking on Windows.
Yeah, and it's a lot of Go code. So if folks actually wanted to write Go code and stuff and not spend a bunch of time just installing Windows and like here's a chance to get in there and write some code, because now that we've got this job, folks can write some Go code, compile things, make a PR, you know.
Yeah.
And
And I
don't-
think there's an opportunity for writing some unit or integration tests that don't require cluster as well with whatever you call it, like the file to store, Jay.
Yeah. Yeah. If folks want to,
We should make an issue into detail. I'll do that after this, is detail an
Yeah.
issue for how we could run those EDE tests.
yeah,
Or not EDE tests, integration tests.
yeah, I can. Yeah. Now I have a question. If I talk to someone, can I do the Windows? If I have a Windows laptop, let's say I'm sitting around, I got a Windows, I go to Best Buy and I buy a laptop and it's got a Windows on it. The Windows that you buy from the store, not Windows Server. Is there a way that I can then run the HNS APIs and stuff on that machine so that we can give a developer story to folks and say, look, yeah, like any Windows machine, you can, then we can use that. Yeah, I see you nodding. You can interrupt me, James. I'm rambling. You know what I'm asking?
Yeah. Yes, you can. Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
the HNS binary
Yeah, because I
runs.
think that's all bundled with, or that's part of like the Windows containers work, and you can run Windows containers on the desktop SKUs, the non-server SKUs.
The hardest thing would be just getting containerd installed and running the right version of the Windows image. If
We don't
they
need
wanted to do
containerd
that.
though, right? Because
No, you wouldn't
For this
necessarily need
project,
it.
yeah.
Yeah. Unless you were trying to test it as like a host process container.
Yeah, this is
but-
more like a thing of they run the they run the K2 what is it? K2S. There's like so many, there's like 9 different combinations.
Well, they'd want the file to store, right? Because
Yeah.
they don't need to get the updates from the Kube API server.
Yeah, they would just run the file to store and then they would just see if they could make those API calls to add endpoints for pods that didn't exist, right? And then they would run that as a Windows program, a Golang invocation. And then if they could have a Kubernetes API server running locally, which I can do that in WSL, right? I can have an API server running in WSL, and then I can just run file to store, right? And if I'm running file to store, well, I guess I can use kube to store if I do that, but I could just do file to store really if I don't even. So yeah.
Just give it some YAML files and
Yeah, you can go file to store. So it should be file to store then, right? Yeah,
Can
file
you
to
both?
store and kube to store. Both would be great for someone who wants to help and doesn't want to spin up a whole cluster. Yeah.
I'll make an issue in the service Windows
make an
Service Proxy
issue.
repository.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
It's interesting you brought up the running a container and getting the right version. We're noticing that with folks who are new to Windows, when you ask them to bring up a Windows workload, they find it really difficult. And I've pointed them at all the docs that we have, the Microsoft docs and all that. And they're like, it's still not obvious. Like the issue they're saying is they go to like Docker Hub and look at a Windows image. By looking at a Windows image there, they're not sure what to do from that step. So I sometimes feel like we need to get better and make this a little bit more obvious, like at least for the base images, as to which platform you can, or which OS variant you can run them on. I don't know if other folks are running into this issue with folks who are just starting with like Windows, writing a Windows.
Yeah,
deployment.
it's not really clear to me. Like, what do I do if I want to make a sample application? What do? I get .NET 3 and then I get some version of Docker and then I hope that the thing that I build will work on the Windows Server 22 instance that I have. And if it doesn't, I go look up a table or something. And there's that weird table somewhere on the internet that has all the base images and versions, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the workflow, isn't it?
Yeah, and that table, the feedback I'm getting is folks are finding that table like confusing and not sure what it implies. And I don't.
Are these people who are familiar with Windows?
No, they're not.
Okay, so they're not familiar with Windows and they're building Windows containers because I was just wondering if they're familiar with Windows but not containers, or like what
No,
type
they're
of-
familiar with containers. They're familiar with Linux containers, but they're not familiar with Windows. And I'm hesitant to go and tell them, go and learn all this stuff about Windows before you can, start running a container, because that's one way of telling people, okay, this is too complicated, don't do it, that sort of thing, right? So I'm
Yeah.
trying to get them into like an easy path that they can do this.
I think the problem is it's like hard to even know what question to ask, right?
Yeah.
And I think that goes to the whole thing of like, there's no, we have SIG-Windows samples, right? So don't we have like a SIG-Windows examples repo or SIG-Windows samples or something like that?
I think so, but that's not really maintained. And I know there's examples on like the Windows container docs, the Azure docs, and things like that, but that is more like run this deployment file and then verify it's running. It's not actually trying to build the container, which is probably where some of the confusion.
Yeah, we don't have like a quick start guide for like containers on Windows on Kubernetes, do we? Like we have guides for getting a cluster up and running.
So I kind of have one of those. It's not anything official, but it was when I was working on RK2. And like we'd have QA people be like, hi, I have a Windows laptop. How do I test? It's not anything official though, so I'd be happy to find those notes and throw them in a document somewhere so we can rev on it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have anything like that. Like, is there another document that he can add his notes to, or should he just start it? I don't think we have anything like that.
Brendan's not here, but Brendan, I think, might be able to help find what documents we have and then where to put it. Brendan Smith. But
I mean, the use case that I know of is I have a .NET 3 app and I want to run it in a pod. What do I do now? Right? And then there's that, and then there's something like I have some Windows app that talks to a PCI device and I want to run that in a pod. What do I do now? Those are the two that I know of that are like, and then there's three. I have a Windows app that does .NET, that's .NET 3 that needs to be fully integrated with Active Directory, and I want to run that in a pod. Right? It's like there's like 7 or 8 of these things that are, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
and it's like, I think that, Ross, is like, to me, that's how you tell this story, right? It's like, it's something like, here's who I am, here's what I want to do. What's one way to do that, right? And then if we do that, then we can just add stories to it and people will know what to look at, because most people are pretty smart. Like once they kind of are into one funnel, they're able to dig around and figure out the details, right? But the problem is sometimes people don't know what funnel to start from, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, Ross, what do you think? You think you could like frame your document that way for us, kind of?
Absolutely. I had actually kind of started writing something very similar but separate as part of a KEP. So yeah, I can merge those two together.
Okay, cool. Yeah. While we're looking for new contributors, operational readiness work has frozen because we lost the person that was working on it. Me and Amin are flat out, and
Oh yeah.
I'm trying to onboard new people. I'm spending all my time doing that, and folks are coming online. But we need, if somebody wants to write some Go code, we have the operational readiness stuff, and we haven't finished it. So that's another one, and it's easier than the kube proxy stuff. So it's
You want to remind everybody what the status of that is? Is that alpha or beta right now?
the operatingness.
Yeah, I forgot if it was.
I don't know
Where
if
the-
we did versions around it, did we? I mean, it's probably alpha, if anything.
What is that?
So okay, so it's our version of Kubernetes conformance, right? So the backstory there was over here, when we over at Tanzu, when we decided to release Windows support for Kubernetes, there was always this circular question of like, well, how do we know whether our thing is as good as what Azure does or is as good at what Red Hat does or whatever, right? So we're thinking about this and we're like, well, the reason this is such a complicated thing to ask is that there is no actual conformance suite for Windows that we can run. So I think it was what was her name? Evelina or whatever. She started an issue. She created an issue about 3 or 4 years ago. And she's like, look, we should have conformance for Windows. And then, so we had like 400 comments about that. And then we, 2 or 3 years later, we're like, okay, let's write something. And then Mark had this idea of let's call it operational readiness instead of conformance so that we don't have to.
Well, I think what Adelina added was a node conformance for Windows, not just the regular conformance, but then it sounded like node conformance was in limbo and going away. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I thought it was inflammatory because we said the word conformance, but
I think a little bit of that too, but it was even more because we said node conformance.
Yeah. So, and Mike, you know what the conformance tests are, right? Like the CNCF conformance spec, right? Like there are 250 tests. If you run them, then you're a Kubernetes provider officially. If you don't, if your distribution fails on them, then you're not, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the general rule, except for edge devices where sometimes you may have like one node and that's running a Kubernetes cluster and that fails conformance because there's one test that requires you to have 2 nodes, but that's another thing. So there's this, but in general, conformance, and the reason I say that is because conformance was built for Linux. It was kind of defined in 2016 or whatever for Linux. So we came out with the operational readiness spec, and what that says is people running Windows clusters, they're different. They need some way of knowing what their cluster supports and what it doesn't support, and whether or not it conforms to some basic set of standards for that, right? So if I'm running a Windows cluster, I want to run my operational readiness specification, and it'll say, yes, you support storage. Yes, you support GPU workloads. Yes, you support Active Directory. Yes, you support persistent volume claims. Yes, yes, yes. And I can just see those bullets in like one page, right? And so that's what it does. It's a plugin. Ameem worked real hard on it. This girl Chinchi, her and Ameem both worked really hard on it, and they got a lot of stuff done. And the initial prototype was like a tiny Go program that I wrote originally, and then they went off and fleshed it out and made it a SonyBuoy plugin. And then Chinchi's not working on a Kubernetes anymore, so she's doing something else now. And so we don't have anybody working on it right now. So it's a bunch of Go code, and it basically runs the E2E tests and publishes a YAML file that really makes it super easy for an end user to know what their clusters do and don't support. And it mostly works. We just don't have anybody owning the completion of it. There's no technical problems to solve. There's no like, it's just, we need an owner to finish bringing it to a full adoption, right? And bugging people to use it and all that. Does that overall make sense?
Yeah, thanks for the overview.
Yeah. So anyways, yeah.
I think we've even got some ED tests set up for this to validate the container image that we've got.
Yeah.
And there was a talk at KubeCon Detroit about this specifically.
Yeah.
Anybody who's interested.
Yeah. I have a link to that. I'll put it in. I'll just put the link to the repo. Here's the repo folks want. But yeah, if anybody wants to get started, ping me or Ameem. We will help you get started. We can pair with you on it.
Yeah, we've got the annual report for the SIG coming up too, which the lead team to start working on. Jay, I think that's a good time to identify what projects we need help with too. So this will definitely be on that list and highlight it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. As far as Windows DevTools goes, so bringing this whole thing up of how do we get new contributors, right? To me, the DevTools is my hope that we'll be able to get people to easily contribute that way. But so Pramita tried using Fusion this weekend, and it turns out that VMware Fusion on a Mac does not support emulation. So, but the maintainer of Vagrant QEMU responded about 5 days ago with a potential work test of whether or not we could start using QEMU again. So we're going to try to use QEMU. We're going to basically, I think the guidance is going to wind up looking something like this, and we'll put this into a document. If you want to contribute to Windows, there's kind of like, it looks like 3 stories. You can use VMware Fusion or VMware Workstation, and they'll work the same way, and they'll use Vagrant. Or if you're on a Mac OS X machine, then you either have a cloud account or you use QEMU manually. And that's because there's no ARM support on Windows. And that, I mean, that's a pretty complicated developer story, but I don't think that we can do anything simpler than that because of the fact that there's, because of the fact that these M2 and M1 chips just now, but what we're hearing from everybody is VMware Workstation on Windows works great. So are all the new Microsoft laptops, are those all ARM now? Or are those still AMD 64? Sorry, you're mute, James.
I think most like workstation class laptops are going to be AMD 64. I mean, there are more ARM devices coming out, but
okay,
those are more tablet-y things. I don't think.
So should we just lean in the direction of saying there's no explicit support for M1 and M2 Macs, and just say, look, get a Windows or Ubuntu laptop?
Is it on the roadmap for VMware Fusion?
I don't think so.
So Jay, I'm getting confused with what you're saying and what you've written down. You've written down using VMware Workstation, but you're talking about using QEMU everywhere.
I know. I switched tab. Let me go back to that document.
Okay.
Okay. Here we go. Let's fix this. So here we're going to say you're basically doing a cloud account and or QEMU manual. Okay, is that
I'm gonna drop for SIG node too.
is that better, Arvin?
So I'll see everybody later.
Okay, so QEMU, in spite of what that person said, you're just going to drop it, right? Or are you just following up what that person said with QEMU Vagrant is just to see if you can get it going on a M1 Mac?
If that works, then we may have a way to start talking about QEMU again. I have a feeling that if that manual invocation works, then we can sort of say, sort of looking the other way, we can kind of say, like, well, it looks like QEMU could work for this, but it's not really something that, nobody's really doing it. Like, maybe it seems like for us, the big thing is getting Windows developers engaged, and because anybody can get their hands on a Windows laptop or an Ubuntu laptop if you're realistic. So if we can just have a unified story for AMD 64 laptops, and that solves some reasonable chunk of the problem, right?
Yeah, no, I'm fine with that.
I'm not super happy about that, but it's like, I think that's it's a good second place prize, right?
Yeah, no, I agree.
So I actually have a Mac Studio, and then I also have the last 2 years of the Windows ARM64 dev kits. So this is actually a problem near and dear to my heart. So if anyone wants to kind of pair on that, on figuring out how to do ARM64 support, I would love to do that.
Well, we definitely need to solve this problem for sure, and we don't have anybody looking at ARM on Macs. And so you're saying you've got 100 different ARMs and you can help?
Yes, and I got Raspberry Pi. I have all of it. I have a weird love-hate relationship with ARM devices.
Okay. Okay, what? I mean, I'm literally working on this today. Like I was looking at this morning with Pramita. Let's just do it. You want to?
Yeah, we can pair after this.
What time zone are you, Ross?
Eastern.
Eastern. Okay.
Although I work mostly with West Coast, so I'm flexible.
What time do you wake up in the morning?
I don't think I can answer that on a recorded call. No, but like I'm available pretty much 9 a.m. Eastern time
Okay.
on workdays.
All right. 9 a.m. Yeah, cool. Let's pair now. We can stop the recording and and we can pair on this thing and try to figure out what to do. And what we need is an approach. So I'll open up a Google Doc or something and we can sort of set up the 2 or 3 things we're going to do and see where you're going to help us.
Cool. So
Can you make me
just to
host?
wrap up the main meeting, does anybody else have anything else? Otherwise, we'll see everybody next week. Great. I'll stop the share and recording.
And Andy's here and he mentioned he's